Okay, so we're going to look at how to locate some files on Kali. So using the standard Linux commands, you can use commands locate or find. So locate should do the trick for us for finding most things in the Kali distribution. So if we're looking for tools, we can use locate. Okay, so if we go into our Kali shell, and we will look at the help again, so we're going to use the man page this time. So we'll look at locate, so use the tab to complete the command there. So we're going to look at the man page for locate, and we can see that locate actually searches for files based on a pattern you pass it, and it searches a database rather than the actual file system itself, so it's a lot quicker. So we have to use a command to update that database before we get started. So the command is in fact update db. So if we quit out of that with Q and we do our update db command, so oops, Christmas party, excellent, update db, so that updates the database. It might take a minute or two. Okay, that did indeed take a second or two there, a few seconds. So if we now try the locate command and we look for something like the nmap tool, it should search in the database and it should give us back a list of output. So it gives us quite a lot of different things back. So a neat trick we can use to narrow down what we're looking for, which is the actual tool itself, is to, if you use the up arrow to get that back again, we can pipe the output from that, which means that all this is going to be piped into grep. So we can now filter through that and we can look for the bin directory, which is where you will find the actual executable. And there you go. So you get a much smaller list, and we can see that what we're looking for is user bin nmap, in fact, in this case. So that's quite a handy trick for finding things in Kali. So we can see it's in this directory, hopefully. So another thing we can do is we can do copy, and we can use our cd command to go to that directory. So there's not always using the keyboard for everything. Sometimes the cut and paste is quite handy. So we can go to that directory, and then if we do an ls, we should find tons of stuff. If we do an ls on nmap itself, we'll see the nmap tool there. So a long listing will show that it's a file and it's executable. So we can actually run that. So if we run nmap and look for the help, we'll get the help. And that's probably a better example of where we could do pipe that into less. And we can then look at the help. We can go forward down through the pages of the flags. So this is one of our main tools that we're going to be looking at in the early weeks for scanning. And we can go minus, we can say Control F to go forward, Control B to go back a page. So once you get the hang of these navigation shortcuts, we can say quit to end out, then they're used in quite a lot of the different commands. So if we go back to our tutorial, so we've got the first part of our sort of pen testing useful tools, locating tools under Kali's directory system, using locate. So that should allow you to do the locate part. In fact, I think I've told you how to do some of that. Now we've got network commands. So we're going to look at the SS command. There's various network services commands, but we do need to know about network services which are running on Kali. So Kali is a specialized Linux distribution, so it comes with quite a lot of pre-installed tools, which you can see, and also some pre-installed services. So if you download the Kali VM and create your own pen testing virtual lab on your laptop, you'll find it may be set up slightly differently from the LinuxZoo. Sorry, I lost my track. LinuxZoo. So what we can use, we can use the ss command to look at the services which are running on the current machine. So if we have a look at the man page again, and we go forward through that, there's various things you can use, various arguments. So one of the useful ones is just show the listening services. So this is actually the listening sockets or network services which are running on the machine. So if we quit out of that, so if we do ss standard, we see the connections. If we do ss-l, oops. If we do ss-l, we just get the listening services. So there's nothing actually connected there. These are servers that are running. So Gordon's actually set this one up, so we've got Telnet and SSH running. So Kali also has other services such as a web server, SSH servers, various things installed, but switched off by default. Otherwise, obviously, when you're doing a pen test, you have to be quite careful with which services are switched on and accessible. So as we've said, the HTTP server can be quite useful. So this is the PDF additional lab which you could try for all the same type of things. It's got some more explanations, some diagrams in it as well. So we can see here, this is our Kali Linux VM, and we could be running our web server on port 80 by default. And we could use this to get a client to connect to this web server and download an exploit possibly, or we could use it to do things like to serve files which, if we penetrated a server, we may be able to connect back to our attack machine and download additional tools or additional parts of exploits to do further penetration testing. So this is the command, the service command, which we can use to start our various start, stop, and restart our various services. So if we go back to our tutorial, so that's what we want to do is to be looking at starting and stopping services and then checking if they're running with SS, just some of the basics. Okay, so to start Apache server, we can use the service, use the tab again, Apache 2, and use the start command. Okay, and to check if it's running, we can use our ss-l, looking for listening ports, and we can see that our HTTP port service is running. To use SSL to check which port it's running on, we can also use the N flag. So there we go, so that doesn't translate ports to service names. So we've got TCP port 80 running, so that's our HTTP server, our web server, which we could use to connect to. So if we want to double check that, we can use our browser. So we could use our browser, and we could say go to localhost. There you are, and that's the default page for the web server. So we could use 127.0.0.1, which is the same as localhost. So if we wanted to use our ss command to see everything, so we get listening ports and connections. We want numbers instead of services, and we want to look at processes also. So that gives us a full listing of all the services that are running and the associated processes. So that's quite a useful command. So that's almost one to jot down in your logbooks. ANTP, that's kind of a useful standard command if you want to go to processes level. So the other command that might be quite useful is ifconfig. So it's not a standard networking command, which will just tell you the current setup of your network connection. So this is your virtualized Ethernet connection, and we're inside LinuxZoo in this case, so what we've got is a private network address of 10.0.7.25. But that's useful for anything we're going to use this machine to connect to, or to connect back to this machine. We would need to know, if we were going to connect back to our web server, we would need to know that it's 10.0.7.25, and then on port 80 we'd be connecting back to. So if we wanted to change that web page that's being served, so we've, oops, is it? So web server's still running. If we want to change the web page, we could go to where it's served, which happens to be var www, and then check, and that's the index page. So if we use cat, or we could edit it, that shows you that this is, in fact, it works. So this is the page that's being served by the web server by default. So what we can do is we could send something, edit that page, or send something to the page using echo. So we could echo, which normally goes out to the standard output, which is the command line in this case. We can redirect that to our file. So in this case it would be index.html, and then we can cat the file again, or just use up arrow. And we've got rich rules in the file. So if we now use iceweasel to connect to it, so let's use 001 in this case, it's the same, and we can see that we've changed the file and the web server's now serving that file. So we could do all sorts of things. We could serve whatever things we needed for our pen testing, and we could connect and download those things. Also, we could create our own web pages which look like other web pages, which might be handy to also get a client to connect to and possibly download exploits and such like. So to stop the server, we want to use the same service command again, and we want to stop Apache because we don't want it to running if we don't need it, and just stop, and use your ss command to check it's stopped. Okay, so that's Apache. So we're going to look at, so netcat is an excellent multi-purpose tool, sometimes called a Swiss Army knife type tool for doing some networking. So it can read and write from sockets, so you can create servers with it in one line. You can connect to servers, so you can be a client or a server using it depending on the how you use it. So in the netcat tutorial here, we're asking you to connect to LinuxZoo.net, so you're using netcat as a client, and then once you're connected, we're asking you to type in a command to get information back from the server. So if we go into our shell, we can do netcat nc is the tool, netcat help. We can have a look at the arguments, and it's so you need to, if you're using it as a client, you can give it some options which are here. You have to connect to some sort of host, which would be your server, and tell it which port you're connecting on. If you're using it as a server, to create a server on this machine, you have to use this syntax. So tell it it's a listening port, and you tell it which port -p, and then you've got some options too. Okay, so if we quit out of that with Q, so I can use this to connect to LinuxZoo.net. So I just say nc LinuxZoo.net, and then tell it to connect on port 80. Okay, and that should connect to the server. It doesn't look like it has, but because it's a web server, it's not giving us anything back. We can echo. So if we use the http get command and we look for index.html, then we'll actually interact with the server and it will return. So we did have a connection and it returned, oh, in fact it returned a bad request in that case, but it shows that we did have a connect. Okay, so we try that again, and we use get correctly. If I can type, we do get something back. Okay, so that's connecting to the server using netcat as a client, and then using individual commands to interact with the server. Okay, so we'll leave that window as our client netcat. And what we're going to do is we're going to have another window and we're going to set up a server. So we're going to use NC, I've forgotten the terminology, listening port. So let's do 666. So we're going to set up a server on 666. Or do I need to do port 666? I forget. Let's check the lab. Does it tell you? Minus P 666 in this case. So minus P. So we're setting up our server on 666. So that's now running. So if we have a look in here, we should be able to see that running. So we can actually see the server is running locally on this machine. So if we use our netcat command, but instead of connecting to LinuxZoo server on port 80, let's connect to localhost on port 666. Okay, so there's not much happening. So if we type something, so we have in fact, let's not do that. We have in fact created a connection. So we've got a server running here and a client running here, and it's echoing things back and forward. So we create a very basic text messaging service. Okay, so it gives you some idea how quick it is to set up a server or connect with a client. So we could use netcat for various things, setting up a server and transferring things obviously, or we could connect to various services and then send manual text-based commands. So we can do things like banner grabbing, checking if ports are open with the client, and we can do all sorts with the server too. Okay, very simple.